Everyone. Thank you all so much for being here and giving up what is, frankly, your last remaining days of freedom, just weeks ahead of this session. So we're happy to see you all. Tonight, we are really excited to share where regional planning commissions stand with Act 181 implementation and our work to update regional plans and our future land use maps. The goal is really simple: support more housing and economic opportunity in those places with infrastructure while protecting the rural working and natural landscape that really defines Vermont. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleagues Charlie Baker from Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, Bill Colvin from Bennington Regional Commission, and Dave Snedeker from Northeastern Vermont Development Association, representing regions from across the state and reflecting that diversity of Vermont's 11 RPCs. Together, tonight we'll walk through key components, including the RPCs and LURB roles and responsibilities, the mapping and the planning process, and regional housing targets, in addition to what we've learned so far and what comes next. Unfortunately, our colleague Catherine Dimitrick tonight is under the weather, so she'll be unable to attend. As a little note, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with all legislators following tonight's session. The presentation overall will run about 20 to 30 minutes and to allow for about 30 minutes of questions following the presentation. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Charlie Baker to tell us more. Take it away, Charlie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Devin. For those of you I haven't met, Charlie Baker with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. So just some introductory information here. We are all the regional planning commissions are all updating our regional plans right now. A big focus on housing. With that, what should be in Tier 1B, which for this partial housing exemption under Act 250. And I think one of the biggest things that we're doing with the regional plans with regards to these growth areas is for the first time really aligning the municipal, regional, and state policy and perspective on how our land is used. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're working on that. The Land Use Review Board also has an incredible amount of work on their plate. And they are working very hard. One of the things they do is going to be approving regional plans. With that comes approving designation areas, Act 250 exemption areas. They are also, amongst other things, working on the rulemaking for Tier 2, the road rule, and also Tier 3, the highest priority natural resource areas for mapping and rulemaking for that. And they have a lot of other things on their plate also. I think they owe an appeals study to you and other things. So really, I do want to give a lot of credit and sympathy to the LURB and all the work that they have on their plate. And we do, at the bottom here, just a note that all the RPCs have a deadline in statute that by the end of next year, so almost a year from now, all of the RPCs shall have adopted their regional plans. And I'll review that schedule in a little bit more detail. So we got, along with this came more regional plan requirements, a big focus on engagement with our municipalities and meaningful participation with our residents. Again, the Land Use Review Board approval of regional plans is a new part of the system. So that's new. Some purposes in the regional plan requirements, housing growth areas. We have to have a substantial majority of the housing targets in those growth areas. Also a big focus on climate resilience and staying out of flood-prone areas in particular. Looking at impacts, environmental benefits, and burdens on different communities, and also consistency of regional plans. They were similar, they will be more consistent through this process. In large part because we have standard future land use map requirements with 11 types of future land use areas. And again, mentioning these housing targets. So in terms of schedule, we're kind of pacing ourselves And this has been somewhat negotiated with the Land Use Review Board in order to not overwhelm them. Um, we are all going to go through two phases of review with the Land Use Review Board. One is this pre-application 60-day review that is happening now-ish for some of us and soon for the rest of us. Rutland RPC, thank you, Devin, was the first one to go through the process. They just got their initial pre-application review letter back about 2 weeks ago. Northwest RPC submitted in October. They're getting their letter, I think, by Friday. Chittenden County RPC submitted in late October. We are getting our letter back from the Land Use Review Board right before Christmas. And then I think Adam and in Addison County and in Lamoille County Planning Commission are coming pretty quickly into the 60-day pre-application review process. And we're really trying to phase it out, we are trying to have not more than one per month. We're not quite able to meet that, but we are trying to spread it out as much as we can to make it easier for the LURB to provide adequate review for all of the RPCs. And yeah, that's the most important points there. And just in terms of the regional plans, just want to touch on, they are supposed to be forward-looking, right? We're trying to plan down the road. The housing targets go out to 2050, so that's kind of the time horizon we've been using. We're looking at building vibrant, sustainable communities and encouraging housing in places that are planned for growth. But there's a lot of other planning goals. This graphic on the right-hand side here, just to give you a sense of the 15 planning goals, which include things all the way from flood resiliency to housing, to transportation, to protecting natural resources, and a wide variety of other things, economics, childcare, energy. So we have a lot of goals that we're trying to address in statute, which means there's a lot of balancing that goes on in these regional plans. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bill Colvin from Bennington.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Welcome, everybody. As Charlie mentioned, I'm Bill Colvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Planning Commission in Bennington. So I'm going to talk briefly about the roles and responsibilities of the RPCs and the Land Use Review Board. So as Charlie just described, each of the 11 RPCs is currently working on the next iteration of its regional plan in conjunction with its future land use maps. We will be submitting those for preliminary review to the Land Use Review Board as on the schedule that Charlie just outlined. Eventually, through a back and forth process and working with at our local and regional levels with our local commission or regional commissions, the regional plans will be approved and ultimately approved by the Land Use Review Board. And that approval then leads into the designation of the downtown and village center areas, creating those automatic designations through the future land use mapping process, and creates that ability for municipalities to opt into the Tier 1A or Tier 1B exemption areas through, again, that opt-in process. That's a discussion process which is ongoing now in each of our regions as we're going out to do the outreach about the future land use maps. We are also gathering information on which municipalities are likely to be opting into either Tier 1A or Tier 1B at the end of this process. So roles and responsibilities vis-a-vis the tiers. The regional planning commissions are mapping really all of the kind of Tier 1 eligible areas. These RPC maps do not impact local regulations. So while we are hoping that they will help to inform the local planning processes going forward. They do not impact those regulations. The RPC maps do not change the characteristics of any of the parcels that are being mapped. And again, just as a reminder, that Tier 1B opt-in, should a municipality opt into that process, would provide a 50-unit exemption for housing development. The Tier 1A provides full exemption. Think functionally what happens in Tier 1A is the municipality opts in, identifies it has the capacity to basically take over all of the permitting and compliance responsibilities for state level permitting. The Land Use Review Board really is doing everything else. So Tier 2, well, let me jump to Tier 3 first. So Tier 3 is these critical natural resource areas. The Land Use Review Board is currently in the process. Adam is a representative on that process. They're in that rulemaking process for identifying the mapping for Tier 3. Those are the sensitive natural environment areas. And then really everything else falls into kind of Tier 2. So Tier 2 is generally status quo, goes through the current Act 250 process as it exists now, with the one kind of caveat that the piece hanging out there is really this road rule, which is the rulemaking is currently underway by the Land Use Review Board, which will in some ways impact how those everywhere else categories ultimately fall between Tier 2 and Tier 3 with regard to regulation. As Charlie mentioned, each of the 11 regional planning commissions is using the exact same 11 future land use areas. So if we kind of categorize those into the Tier 1 eligible areas for designations and Act 250 changes, we're looking at the downtown centers, village centers, planned growth areas, and village areas. The more rural areas and characteristic, those categories are, future land use categories are the hamlets, rural general, rural agricultural and foresty, and rural conservation. And that parenthetical note there refers to the fact that if something is in a future land use map as rural conservation, it does not automatically equate to a Tier 3 designated area. Again, those Tier 3 areas will be identified by the LURB through its rulemaking and map making process. And then the other areas that are out there are the transition areas, some of which will be included in the Tier kind of 1 areas, enterprise areas, and resource-based recreation. So think ski areas and other areas where recreation and resource-based activities can take place. And here, the next two slides really will just kind of give you the high-level overview of these draft maps as they exist. So you will see similar color schemes, all the same 11 categories across each of the regional planning commission areas. As Charlie noted, this helps to bring consistency to the planning processes across the state. Each of the 11 RPCs are using the same identified 11 future land use areas. The definitions have been identified. Colors are consistent. So as people look at these maps across the state, they will see similar themes emerging throughout. So here are Lamoille and Chittenden, and then the next two slides show Bennington County's draft map at this point, as well as the draft map of the entire Northeast Kingdom. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dave Snedeker from NVDA. Dave.
Thank you, Bill. And again, Dave Snedeker, Director of the Northeastern Vermont Development Association. So we cover Caledonia, Essex, and Orleans counties. And I think starting off with the slide we're looking at, this is the map of the Northwest Regional Planning Area. But we're trying to show the amount of land that's currently under interim exemption, which the legislature allowed to encourage housing in places where we want it. And then what we were looking at with proposed Tier 1B eligible areas once these future land use maps are enacted. So not a significant change, a little bit more under Tier 1B eligible areas, but the Tier 1B areas better reflect local plans more so than the current interim exemptions. Next slide. This next slide speaks to housing targets. So all of the regional planning commissions were assigned housing targets by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and this in concert with the Department of Housing and Community Development. These targets are massive. You'll see that there's targets set for the period 2025 to 2030, and then 2025 through 2050. So it looks a little bit scary, but these again are for planning purposes only. It demonstrates our need for housing, which I think everyone is aware of, and it helps our regions and communities to set goals. The targets are assigned slightly different by each region, and just provide an example of how we are setting our targets. So we're further down in part of the middle of that chart there, but our targets were basically assigning a certain percentage of our total by population of each community. That way, everybody shares some, I guess, goal for housing, and then we're looking at also the tier 40% of our housing targets are we're assigning where we have eligible Tier 1A or Tier 1B areas. And then the remaining 30% that we are assigning in NVDA's region are by the land use categories that Bill kind of went over with the centers, the downtowns, villages, and growth areas. So again, everybody's a little bit different. The targets are massive, but they are for planning and purposes and aspirational. So next slide, please. And here I'd like to say that there's been significant collaboration throughout this future land use mapping process with select boards and planning commissions. So the regional planning commission staff started out looking at our existing regional plans, our local plans, local regulations, and then working from a standard methodology across all 11 commissions. We've conducted extensive outreach with, again, the select boards and planning commissions across our communities. And we've met in person with every community and many of them more than one time. So in some cases in my region, our staff have met up to 4 times thus far. Regional planning commissions collectively have attended over 480 planning commission and/or select board meetings. Then that's thus far. These meetings are still ongoing, so we're expecting that number to grow and possibly significantly. And then select board engagement happens throughout this bottoms-up process by building upon the town's previous planning work. So it's not the RPCs imposing our wishes on a particular community. We're working with those communities and their goals and their existing regulations. And importantly, for Tier 1B, individual municipalities must vote to opt in. That's not automatically a given. So. Yeah, thank you. So this next slide shows a little bit how the maps have evolved over time based on what our local conversations are. So here we have from the Northwest region, the towns of Fairfax and Belvedere. The maps on the left, respectively, for each community were probably the early maps before just to put in front of the community to get their initial feedback, and then through an iterative process, we end up with a map that's closer to a final version, a final draft on the right for each community. Next slide, please. And then through our meetings with the towns, planning commissions, and select boards, we've heard some common themes and issues across the state. And I won't run through this entire list, but housing needs are large, and affordability comes up under any conversation around housing. So that's important. And importantly, we're noting that nothing that we're doing with these future land use maps changes local regulations. So there's still that local control piece that is concerning to many communities. And then what we're really finding is that a lot of the limiting factor for a lot of what we're doing with future land use mapping is related to infrastructure needs. So if there's not a lot of infrastructure, there's not going to be a lot of change in many cases. We are hearing a lot about preserving rural areas, especially for local agriculture and forestry working lands. That's important. And then there's always expressed some concern about local property rights and expanded Act 250 jurisdiction. But we are careful to note that a lot of that Tier 3 work is being done by the Land Use Review Board, and they have a process for their own, including the road rule. Um, I think what we're hoping is that all of this work will make the need for regional plan amendments easier going forward versus every 8 years, which is currently in statute. So communities may want to change their future land use maps more frequently than what the statute currently sets. And we appreciate the opportunity for collaboration with not just our local communities, but with working with the legislature and other stakeholders in the process. And with that, I'll hand it off to Devin Neary from Rutland Regional Commission.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm realizing now when I kicked off the meeting, I actually never introduced myself. So apologies. My wife and I have our first baby, 6-month-old in our house. So sleep deprivation, I'm doing my best. But with that, I am Devin Neary. I'm the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission and also chair of VAPDA, the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. So I get the lucky pull of the straw here and get to talk about the fun stuff, which is public engagement. Public engagement really is the foundation from which we operate. Um, eh, Public engagement and outreach for this effort is the most significant level of regional planning in the history of Vermont. And it really was laid out in statute to prioritize that. And I believe every regional planning commission has met that challenge and really enhanced their planning process as a result. The statistics don't lie. We have held more than 750 events relating to our future land use mapping and our regional plan updates, and we've met thousands of Vermonters through this process where they're at because we know with public engagement, the old model of holding a meeting at our office and hoping people will come just doesn't work. So we've gone to community centers and libraries and senior centers, schools, farmers markets, and events throughout our regions to really get a better understanding of the priorities of Vermonters. And to really put those priorities first. And as Dave mentioned, ensure that this is a bottom-up approach, that these communities have a say in how our future development and planning is articulated in these plans and maps. How did we do it? Well, we each have our own customized engagement strategy, but they really are diverse in order to meet all those people where they're at and give them as many opportunities to weigh in as they can. We've had public meetings, surveys, webinars, focus groups, tabling events, pop-up events, emails and newsletters, and really trying to use more resources to reach more of our Vermonters like Front Porch Forum. And really, at the end of the day, that's with one goal in mind, to ensure that broad and inclusive participation, so all voices, especially those have historically not been involved in the planning process, in these new maps and plans. So what did we hear? We met with all these Vermonters, but there were very consistent themes that arose through our engagement. Not surprisingly, housing. It's the number one issue. You all talk about it as legislators. We hear it as planners. And the need is across the spectrum from market rate down to workforce, family housing. And really, we heard really consistently that most of that need and most of the want for housing is in our growth areas, and which is great because we know as planners we need that infrastructure to support the housing. But it's not just those areas. Rural Vermont needs housing too, and they need affordable housing because we know affordability is a huge issue right now. And if we're going to grow Vermont and recruit young folks to the workforce, we need affordable housing. Yeah, we did hear that the housing targets from that graphic you saw earlier in the spreadsheet, they are ambitious, and some of our communities aren't necessarily keen on adding a lot of new housing, which is why it's really critical that we customize our maps to meet those wants and needs. We've done a lot of education through this too, clarifying the designations, clarifying the responsibilities that this mapping is not tier three. That is the responsibility of the LURB. Obviously, the economy and job growth coincides directly with housing and transportation options as well. Laying out the public transit planning is critical to ensure that we're getting people to where they need to go. Obviously, one of the huge challenges with doing this mapping is how do we grow up and away from areas that are prone to flooding? Because we've seen it time and time again, and we just can't afford to keep rebuilding our communities in these really flood-prone areas. How do we protect against sprawl and make sure that we are utilizing all the space in Vermont without really impacting those rural communities and natural resources? We heard that what there was some concerns and pessimism as to whether this would really impact housing because there are other stressors like costs that um, are limiting our housing growth potential in Vermont. As I mentioned earlier, we heard pretty significantly from our regions, and here's a survey clip from our own region here down in Rutland during our first phase of engagement, which was our learn and assess phase of our regional plan update. As in Rutland, we're actually updating our entire plan along with the map. So we wanted to know, along with Vermont's state planning goals, are we hearing the same thing? And it turns out overwhelmingly, yes. Folks want to see most of the growth in the downtowns and village areas. Obviously, we heard a little bit about ski areas and rural areas, but it's, overwhelmingly the support is in the areas in which we expected, which are downtowns and village centers. But it was very affirming for us to hear that directly from residents and municipal officials alike. So, nuts and bolts, what does this mean? Where are we at right now? We heard leading into this process, I think some groups and folks were concerned that this was just going to result in rampant development, that it was going to be uncontrolled and Vermont was going to end up like New Jersey. Well, we know for a fact that's not the case. Uh, you know, with the legacy designations, we're only 0.3% of the state. We've seen some modest growth compared to that in terms of what percentage of our state and our regions are eligible for tier one, but it's really quite small. We're talking 2.2% of the state, which is pretty much in line with what those interim exemptions were at 2.3%. So I think, there was some hope that this would grow those interim exemptions beyond what was originally laid out. But what we're finding is based on the statute and some serious ambiguity in the statute that may result in sort of a narrower look and review of these areas may restrict what we're able to do. And I can only speak for ourselves. Rutland RPC is the only RPC that has made it all the way through the pre-application period and has actually received a formal pre-application response from the Land Use Review Board. And I could tell you in our region, which is frankly one of the bigger regions with places like Rutland City and a reasonably big population, what we proposed was a Tier 1B eligible area of 2.4% based on the comments and response we got from the LURB. That may now be more like 1.8%. So I do think, you all as legislators have it with the power to potentially fix some of these statutory issues that may be sort of undermining our efforts as regional planners to really find areas to meet these massive housing targets that have been laid out for us. So while I think this is not all bad, I think, there's more that could be done. And we certainly hope that as much of Vermont that's able to hold growth through our infrastructure can be eligible for these really important exemptions. So with that, we made it through right on time, 5:32. Awesome. I want to thank my colleagues, Charlie, Bill, Dave, and of course, Catherine, who couldn't be here but was critical in getting this presentation together. And obviously, thank you all for taking time out of your night. We really want to spend the next 20, 30 minutes just open for questions from you all. You can direct them to each of the directors here or to me, whatever floats your boat. You can dump them in the chat or just raise your hand, and we'll get a call on you. Don't all jump at once unless we were that thorough that you're like, we know it all now. We are experts in Vermont regional planning, but I'm sure there are some questions. I see one just popped up. Laura, go ahead.
Yes, hi, and I'm driving. Thanks very much for doing this. Really helpful. Would appreciate having these slides available to all of us. I don't know if you've already sent them out. I expect you would anyway. Question that I have, I was really surprised to hear the number of public events, and perhaps it's just my region. But is that something that you would be able to provide for us, a breakdown by RPC, the number of public events?
Well, I can tell you, one of the requirements, based on the new statutory mandates is for us to report in our regional plans how we met the goal for meaningful public engagement. So I do anticipate that a lot of our regional plans will have that information in them. Now, as Charlie laid out in that earlier slide, each of the regional planning commissions are at very different stages. So some, like us, we're very far along in the process because our plan actually expires in June. So we're really motivated to start. And we actually started our update back in 2023. While other regions, which similar to your own in Wyndham, I believe they just updated their regional plan, so they're a little bit slower to the process. So I think that breakdown will be available. I can tell you with our own regional plan draft, Laura, we have a robust engagement strategy report. You probably don't want to read it. It's another 200 pages, but each of us are obligated to lay out exactly how we met that requirement. And I think a lot of our websites have been updated to sort of lay out to various degrees. Each RPC is different where we've been and what we've been doing, at least to try to get the word out. Hopefully that answered your question. And one other thing, Laura, we are recording, and I will be sending out a link to this recording to all the legislators tomorrow, along with a quick one-pager to sort of surmise what we talked about.
That's great. Thanks, Devin. And I apologize for my little companion that's followed me into the meeting. I haven't figured out how to shut that off. So I'll also have a summary, which is
Okay.
lovely.
Yep.
But I think my question was, you all compiled for this meeting the number 750 public events. So presumably that's something that you could send us out by region.
Yeah, I think we have some very rough high-level numbers that compiled that 750 number, not maybe specifics, but we can do our best. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great just to understand the data behind that. And here's why I think it's important as we're getting ready to go back into the session and engage with this law. It's just important for us to have as much information. I am particularly interested in who is notifying Vermonters about potential limitations on using their land, which it sounds, my takeaway from this meeting is that's not you guys.
Yep.
So just understanding these public engagement meetings and what the focus has been of them. So
yeah,
that'd be
fair.
really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks for doing this also. I think great opportunity for legislators. I wish there were more here, and I do really appreciate you all taking the time after hours to pull this together. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Please drive safe, Laura, and have a good night. Okay, I see. Next up, do we have Brian?
Thanks. I'll just jump right in. I I'm excited to look more closely at your report and at the maps later. I'm curious, like and if I miss something, it glitches a lot for me. So if I miss something during the meeting, and I actually accidentally left and had to come back too
Okay.
because I hit the wrong button at some point too. So if um if you answered this, I'm sorry, but like I'm curious. I know we're talking a lot about housing, and like a lot of the intent here was to address the housing crisis. I'm curious how much we're talking with the public about other aspects of development, like the integration of agriculture into housing, or healthcare infrastructure, educational infrastructure, other components of the environment that we might want to think about when we develop over the next 50 years or so.
Yeah, um, and if anyone else wants to jump in, they can. I think, as Charlie laid out in a previous slide, there are 15 required elements in a regional plan that speak to all those critical components that you just laid out, Brian. And ultimately, the point of a regional plan is to harmonize all these distinct and really important planning elements and state planning goals, to align, uh, uh, our housing targets with these other needs. So I think these plans are not a silver bullet and answer all Vermont's problems in one document, but I think they do consider all those different uh, competing and complementing needs. Does anyone want to add to that, or you feel?
Well, just because the representative brought up healthcare, I just want to note that health is not one of the 15 goals
Mhm.
that are addressed in statute, and so I don't think our plans help very much in the healthcare discussion. So anyway, I just make that little note.
Yeah.
I appreciate that because and I'm sorry that we haven't given you more direction around that because it's an area we're going to have to look at now. And so it's like you did all this work and now we're going to be looking at healthcare resources, but I'm pretty confident that you can integrate that in to this work as the legislature does our work because this does seem really thorough and I know we gave you a lot of work to do, and I appreciate it. I do look forward to seeing like the whole sort of final thing and spending a lot of time like digesting all this work. So and like Laura said, thank you for making time on top of everything else for this meeting.
You bet. Thank you for joining us. David.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Uh, I'd appreciate your reaction and advice. I've heard from several constituents who have passionately urged me to try to delay the implementation and to put this off for a year, especially regarding Tier 3 and the impact that it's going to have on Vermonters. Could you share with me any insight or reaction you might have to that, please?
Geez, so we're third rail. Sorry, no, tier 3 is what we're talking about. But yeah, I think the LURB has that responsibility, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the other RPCs, but I do think that we can see the challenge that's out there with the communication and the engagement with the public on this and property owners. And I don't see a reason why uh, you wouldn't want to give the LURB some more time to get it right rather than get it done by an artificial deadline. So I I think, and I don't know, I'm looking for some nodding heads from my peers, but I think generally we've talked about being supportive of giving them more time.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
I'm
Thank
happy to add to that, Charlie. Again, Dave Snedeker from Northeast Kingdom, and we had a meeting with the Land Use Review Board on Tier 3 and the road rule up in Newport, and the audience expressed a lot of the same concerns that you kind of did about the significant impact of the at least the initial draft maps of how much of our area is going to be subject to Act 250. including there are a number of your peers that were in the meeting that night, and then also a number of realtors from our county. So I think a delay may be appropriate for this, the implementation of Tier 3 in the road rule.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Hi, thanks so much. Can you walk us a little bit through the process, that sort of timetable, and how it would work out for Tier 1B voting, municipal votes on that? As it's something that as legislators you may want to make sure we sort of have in mind with respect to how municipalities individually will react to 1B designation?
Yeah, so one component of our regional plans as a sort of separate standalone component is Tier 1B municipal resolutions that are required to sort of verify that the municipalities are meeting the requirements and have that local capacity to take on that new role. So each of us have sort of engaged our communities early in the process to let them know what is potential. And I know in my own region, Jonathan, we had 4 communities that didn't have, for instance, subdivision regulations to meet those requirements. All of them have recently adopted them, so they are eligible. So each of us, depending on the adoption schedule, will sort of define when towns can get in at the, an appropriate deadline to, because they ultimately need to be in by the time of, those final hearing warnings for adoption. And obviously, this was one of the discussion points earlier about easier regional plan amendments. So if a town, for instance, doesn't have subdivision regulations and after we adopt quickly does and now is eligible, but we were not able to map them as such, we do need some sort of avenue to be able to add them in and get them that benefit without going through another 8-month adoption process. So I would say, and if other directors want to weigh in, ultimately it's about where we are in the process as to when those municipal resolutions are needed. But I know most of us, especially if you're at the stage where we are, like in our region, we've already gotten all of our municipal resolutions completed. So I think it really comes down to that adoption date.
And I would just jump in and add, Devin, again, Bill Colvin from Bennington. I mean, I think that has been an essential part of the discussion as part of this whole future land use mapping process. A lot of the discussion with our select boards and planning commissions have centered around that potential Tier 1, mostly Tier 1B designation process. It's where people kind of line up with regard to their interests. So my guess is regardless of where the RPCs are in the process, there's a pretty good feeling as to which municipalities are likely to opt in. I know even though we're several months behind where Rutland is, we've had a number of municipalities already commit to opting in. Again, we're nearly a year out from adoption, but we have a pretty clear understanding of where those are likely to fall.
Thank you, Bill. Rob.
Thank you, Devin, for putting this on for us. It's very helpful. My question revolves around the kind of the definition of the term exemption. When we go around and talk with our folks, our constituents, and we're thinking about voting on Tier 1A and Tier 1B, what exactly is it that the folks are being, or those regions are being exempted from? I'm kind of asking it rhetorically. I kind of know what the answer is, but what it really exempts them from is more state involvement, and what it requires actually is a flow down a lot of those requirements and assurance of those requirements being met at a more local level. And so it really kind of amps up the expectation at the local level. And I'm wondering kind of what the RPC's role is in aiding especially the smaller rural areas, towns that just don't have the wherewithal to take on that level of responsibility.
Yeah. Charlie, I see you unmuted. Do you want to take this one?
Well, I just we have been spending a lot of time with our towns trying to make as clear as we can the distinction between 1A and 1B. What you described sounded very much like the 1A situation. So when if a town wants to take on uh, the responsibility of not having Act 250 at all, then there are some additional requirements to kind of be, I'll call it Act 250 light at the town level. But that's 1A. I'm going to expect that maybe 10 to 15 of our largest municipalities opt in to that. For Tier 1B, there is no additional obligation to add any regulatory requirements for a town to be in 1B, which exempts up to 50 units on less than 10 acres of land per project. So that is really, I think when the legislature was discussing this a couple of years ago was, as long as you got basic zoning and subdivision regulations in place, that should be enough for you to regulate, to the degree that the town wants to, the development. So there is a distinction. There is no additional responsibility for Tier 1B towns, which is the lowest level. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I'll just add, Rob, as a region with some smaller towns, we have had, for instance, Benson. They meet all the requirements to be a 1B town, but have decided that they ultimately don't want to opt in because they don't want to take on the added burden, and they want Act 250 involved in development in their town. So I think it's the right fit for the right town at the right time. And like I said, that could change over time. Benson may feel differently down the road, but I think, just as Charlie said, if we're really open and honest about what the expectations are, then towns can decide for themselves whether they want to pursue any of those exemptions or not.
Thank you.
Don't see any other hands. Are there any other questions? It looks like we had a couple in the chat that looks like answered overall.
Yeah, I did my best to respond to them.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay. Going once, going twice. Any more questions from folks? Obviously, tonight's not it. If you have further questions, we are available, whether you want to speak to your own regions director. Oh, I do see a hand. Yes, Cattell.
Kate?
Hi, it's Kate Lally.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I
KL. Got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, new baby, get it. Let's see. One of the things that's interesting to me is that we have made it so that the Tier 1B folks, they have to opt in. I think the housing crisis is so significant. I really think that we need to flip that. People should be in a situation where they've got to opt out. I think that just makes intuitive and logical sense at this point. We have to remember that sprawl is the easiest thing to build. I mean, that continues to be the case. We're hoping to make some progress at reforming state agency regulations on that, but to a great extent, that is the status quo. And I think by not, making it as easy as possible for us to build in the right locations, the locations where we say we want to have housing, I think that's very concerning. I mean, the fact that you are ending up with far fewer eligible locations than you had envisioned is very, very much a cause for concern. And then flooding adds a whole new dimension to this because the locations where we can build are not necessarily directly adjacent to where the law says that we should be locating these new housing complexes or neighborhoods or whatever we want to call them. So I think, there's just a lot of tweaking that's going to need to be done. And really, this is all in the service of pursuing the housing that is going to be as ecologically sustainable and as safe from an uncertain climate as possible. So we should not hesitate to be really bold in our thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Brian, I see you have another question.
Yeah, when I realized there was a chance, I figured why not ask. I'm curious about I've been on the healthcare committee for 9 years, and we don't talk much about the regional planning commissions on that committee. I'm curious about your experience working with the Green Mountain Care Board and other stakeholders when it comes to planning around healthcare, because I have a feeling we're going to need you to be part of those discussions moving forward when we look about realigning the healthcare system and trying to salvage it. And I'm just curious, what don't I know? And if it's a lot, we can talk about it more later. But what experience do the RPCs have working with the healthcare system? And if not, that's good to know. And then the second question is, what do you know about blue zones? So those are my questions.
Yeah, so for your first question, beyond sort of considering larger community facilities and utilities in that section of our regional plan, it's kind of not a typical area that we do work in. Obviously, we consider social determinants of health and health needs assessments, those sort of aspects to round out those sort of socioeconomic data sets that drive regional planning. But no, that would be a relatively new area. And I do not know, you said blue map?
Blue zones.
Blue zones?
Yeah,
Yeah.
blue zones.
Is anyone familiar with what that is?
I'll send
Yeah.
at least Charlie, I'll send this to, and he can maybe share it with others. But I think I might have an email for VAPDA. But it's essentially areas on the earth where there's record or unusual amount of people who live past the age of 100, because there's certain elements in their social and physical environments that promote health. And one of the things that I'm going to be working on this year is talking about how to make Vermont into a blue zone. And so it really would connect to the work you're doing now at land use, because there's elements related to land use. So I don't want to take up more space now, but I'll share that info with you all. And I'm happy to, and I'm going to come tomorrow morning to the Chittenden County event. I believe it's tomorrow morning. And so I can talk more with the staff there, and I'll just be in touch with you all about the concept. And also there's a Netflix documentary about blue zones if you're interested.
Yeah, I'll check that out. And yeah, I think maybe we'd enjoy a discussion offline about that.
So Devin, if I could just jump in quickly in response to that too, I do believe that the new environmental justice requirements that are part of the new, the new requirements for approval of the regional plans is dictating additional considerations around health issues, particularly for vulnerable populations. But it's impossible to do that without taking health issues, kind of writ large into consideration. So perhaps more than previously, I do believe that some of those health impacts are being considered as part of this regional planning process, if not at the level that you're necessarily discussing. But I do think there's enhanced recognition of the impacts on regional planning.
Thanks. I also want to acknowledge that you do take into account the social drivers of health. I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of that, and I appreciate what you do with that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Bill. Laura.
Yeah, like Brian, I'll take one more question if I can. So towns, you all have, I'm interested in decision making. Let me just, get right down to it. So in terms of deciding, actually being able to say, yes, this is the map, or no, this is not the map, who are the entities that are able to make those decisions with regard to the future land use maps?
Do you mean with regard to opting into Tier 1B?
No, I do not. I mean to the map itself, to determining what the map is for the region, for the town, and then at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Regional Planning Commission has a responsibility to do the map, but because our boards are made up of our municipalities, we are really working, hand in glove with our towns to get consensus on the maps before we're submitting to the state. And then, of course, the state, the Land Use Review Board, has the responsibility for approving the maps finally. Does that help?
So it does. Just for clarification, is there does any town have an ability to exempt themselves, oppose a map, say we're not participating, or we don't agree with that, and therefore we're not going to? I mean, it's a state law, right? So
Yeah.
Act 250 is a state law.
And the important one thing we kind of, sorry, we're probably too close to the forest to see all the trees, but, or no, how's it, vice versa, whichever. But one of the things that we glossed over was the fact that, you know, of our 250 towns, I think, you know, 230 of them have done town plans. So we weren't starting from scratch here and trying to impose something new. We're really building off of what exists. So I'm having trouble imagining a scenario where the town is just like, no, don't acknowledge our town planning work at all. We're kind of getting some like tweaking. We're trying to fit these land use categories. So we're kind of tweaking it with our towns to make it fit. So I don't know, at least I haven't had the experience of any town saying we don't want to be included at all, because we got to map them somehow. And you know, I think everybody has understood, like, they want to be part of that mapping process and not walk away from it. But I don't know if others have had different experiences.
Well,
Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bill.
I would just jump in that, you know, back on one of the slides that was shown, showed kind of the iterative process between kind of the draft future land use map that went through a community and kind of where it ended up now. And I think in both of those cases, there were fairly substantive changes, which came directly out of communications with the town. So I think that process is ongoing, which hopefully in all the regions is being responsive to the municipal needs, concerns, desires, hoped for outcomes.
Yeah, just to add to that, Laura, you know, we've all had regional future land use maps for decades now as well. You know, ours dates back to the 1970s. And, you know, at least in our region, I'm confident this is true for everyone else, that we changed maps to the extent we could based on the law as much as towns wanted. If we're like, yes, this will meet, because ultimately, and what we just learned in Rutland is that you can't just throw anything against the wall, because the Land Use Review Board has that ultimate authority and is going to say, hey, this does or does not meet the statute as we interpret it. And our map is changing somewhat because of that interpretation as well. So it's kind of this balance, right? Of, you know, we're mapping based on data sets in the law, based on the engagement, and then based on what the LURB says as the ultimate arbiter. So yeah, it's a unique balance that's kind of new for us.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
if I can just add one more piece. It is a negotiated process, as I've kind of touched on earlier. So we've had very small rural communities that end up with a village area because we're mapping it based on the criteria we're giving or the characteristics, and they say that they don't want that because it's going to imply development pressures to their communities. But we've also shrank areas that we consider growth areas or village areas because the community doesn't really want that particular area of town to be expanded or something like that.
Thank you. I would just say that I spend a lot of time when I'm not in the legislature trying to figure out how we can help our towns grow their grand lists, because really it's how they can, as I'm sure a lot of you do. And Act 250 is not a way to do that. It's actually a way to suppress the growth of your grand list, and in particular in rural towns. And as we've gone through here today, you know, I appreciate the work that you all are doing to help identify those exemption areas. Tier 2 and Tier 3 is basically most of the state. And I'm really concerned about our town's awareness of this. And I don't actually think it's accurate or appropriate to say that this is not going to change local regulation or local control. Because when you're depressing grand list growth, uh, in a time of expanding need for taxes to adjust for climate change and other things, it actually is making some pretty big changes in particularly our smallest communities. So more to debate on this, I'm sure. But again, I will say thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you, Laura. Eddie.
Hi, it's Edie.
Edie, sorry.
No worries. Um, so I was listening for a couple of things. One of the things I was listening for is recommended changes to the law, and I'm wondering if you have them and if you're working with somebody already, because our deadline has passed, but the Housing Committee can always do something, or if you're waiting for more information to see how what we put in place played out before we make changes, because sometimes we make changes too fast. And so I'm just curious if you have a collective opinion on this or individual opinions on this or your thoughts.
I guess I'll take that. So I head up our government relations committee. So we have definitely been looking at where the hangups are in statutory language. And Edie, I'm going to say yes and yes to your questions, which is a bit of a non-answer. I think we are trying to work with the folks that really sponsored this and led this effort at the front end. And I think there is some interest in letting the LURB do its process for this year and then see next year what all the changes need to be. At the same time, I think we're feeling some angst that our plans are going to be submitted for approval in ways that maybe don't make as much sense locally as we wish they did. So we do have some language. We have not actually asked any legislator to sponsor a bill yet. So it would have to be, we know it would have to be a committee bill. And I think depending, we're kind of happy to go whichever way the legislature wants to go. Certainly we'd be very happy if the language got changed soon. And so that, sorry, I'm looking at Devin in particular. I think, his region and my region are, and I think even the first three regions, I think, are getting some significant issues coming up from the Land Use Review Board's interpretation of the statutory language. And I don't mean to say they're like under or over interpreting. I think the statutory language is challenging to actually define the growth areas the way they really are. And it's really the language around being walkable to a historic center, and that, which is a great goal, but our landscape hasn't always developed in that way. And just to point to South Burlington, there's a lot of South Burlington that's walkable. They have a lot of walkable sidewalks and bike paths, but where's their historic center? And so I'm really curious to see how the Land Use Review Board reacts to South Burlington. As just one example, I could talk about Jericho as well, but I think if it is too tight and it does not include areas that really should be included in our growth areas, like in South Burlington, that may be a reason that we ask for quicker legislative action than waiting till next year. I'm sorry, was that a long enough non-answer?
No, I think that is exactly what I was fearing, I guess, right? We don't have enough information yet. We're going to get to the end of this session and we may or may not have enough information to make good decisions going forward. And my fear is that we have a whole another year before we can actually fix things. And so,
yeah,
I mean, 2%.
And so we do have some language that we tried to, it had more language. We tried to really reduce it and be like concise. What do we really need changed in the short term? So let us know if you're interested in having that conversation, and we can certainly follow up on that.
I'm interested, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring it up tomorrow morning too. And sorry, for those of you outside Chittenden County, we have our legislative breakfast in Chittenden County tomorrow morning.
Okay, we are past 6, but we're happy to stay on if folks have additional questions. If not, like I said, this meeting is being recorded and we will share out the recording to everyone, even if you weren't on the call tomorrow, along with a one-pager to sort of surmise what we talked about today. And of course, each and every director is available to speak to any of you at any point. And hopefully we will get a chance, at least the government relations team, to see you all up at the State House this session. Thank you all so much for your uh, attention tonight, and of course for your service to Vermont as reps and senators. Really appreciate it. So please enjoy the holidays and, like I said, your last few days of freedom before the silly season kicks up. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Thank you.